Alrighty, well thank you all for inviting me to come along today. It's a privilege for me. And I've come out with a big statement here, why computer game designers should design tabletop games. I need to confess that I actually do not know very much about computer games. I do not know what you do, so you have to correct me if I get anything wrong. I'm here to learn from you as well. The last time I was designing computer games, I was using something like this. Anyone remember these? You're all probably too young. These are the old Osborne how to program your computer back in the days of the C64, all little text-based games. So that's about where my knowledge ends up. But what I do know is tabletop games. I've been in the industry for 20 years. I've worked as a designer, a reviewer, a consultant, a columnist. I've traveled around the world to all sorts of conventions as guests, and I've run conventions. Most of my published work has been in wargaming and role-playing. I've worked for games like Games Workshop. I've worked for White Wolf. I've worked for Eden Studios. Bit of a theme there, but it's just a coincidence. Mostly, though, what I am is a student of games. I like to study games. I like to find out how they work. I like to study the industry and the hobby and find out how it works, why people play games. I think playing games is something that's really a huge part of who we are as humans. It's a really important part of our psyche, how we interact with narrative elements. And I think, though, at the moment, this is probably the most exciting time in game design that's ever happened in the history of humanity. But so much game design is going on that the field is very, very wide. And so it's impossible to keep track of it all. And it's also getting very deep. The kind of work that you guys are doing here is into genres and games that are very developed and very intricate, and that makes it harder to see into from outside. And what can happen then is you can get design ghettos, where all of the people doing certain types of games are talking to each other. And sometimes the really great ideas come from reaching across the walls of those ghettos. And so what I'm here today just is to help suggest to you how to look beyond those walls and get some new ideas. So the first reason is why you should make tabletop games. You can't ignore literally everything else. And I say literally everything else because our best working definition of what a tabletop game is it's gaming that isn't a computer game. The term tabletop gaming is very imprecise. It's not a perfect word. We used to call them board games. Sometimes there was war games and role-playing games. That would be a three-way split. But nowadays, there are role-playing games that work like board games and war games that work like board games. So slowly we've started to use the word tabletop game to embrace it all. Even though some of them don't use tables, they're just parlor games. Will Wheaton has a show on YouTube, Tabletop, which has helped people become more accustomed to using this term. But often when I talk to computer gamers, they haven't heard this term yet. So I say, what do you know about tabletop games? They think I'm talking about that, the old arcade tabletop systems for playing things like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong. So when I say tabletop, I'm talking about board games, I'm talking about role-playing games, and all the new ways that those games are being played. And the definition, as I say, of those games is everything that isn't a computer game, because it's so much out there that is this kind of gaming, and that's how people are coming to define them. And that's really important, I think. If you guys are studying computer games, you're designing games, I think it can be immensely useful to understand, if you're looking at the limits of what computer games to do, to look at that from the other perspective. What we have here is the complement set. Everything but computer games. So if you see the limitations of those, you get a lot more information about what computer games can and can't do. In fact, get to that in a sec. I also, when I travel around people, I ask people why they play tabletop games, and this is the other thing that's key. Not only are they literally everything else, the thing that drives people to tabletop games is that there's something that they're not getting from computer games. Everywhere I go, I ask people, why do you think people play tabletop games? Why are you drawn to them? And they almost always start their sentence with the same 5 words. They say, I play computer games, but. And that but is hinged on what they're not getting from that experience. And it's almost always a social element. It's something that they want to. We were increasingly isolated in this day and age. We live alone and we work alone. We're looking for social experiences as much as possible. Tabletop gaming is a really great way to provide that. Of course, I often say, well, there are a lot of social opportunities on computer games these days. You can play with friends. You can play online. Generally, what they tell me is that those things just aren't sufficient. The chat rooms are very hostile, very sexist sometimes. They're not great for newbies. And also people want a face-to-face kind of experience. So that's what they are looking for when they come to tabletop games. So, second reason why you should make tabletop games. You have to make games to understand games. Now this is something that's fairly obvious. It's really just an expansion of the first point. I'm sure all of you know here that the moment you came to university and started thinking about how to design games, you started seeing games from a different light. As soon as you put your game design hat on, you start, when you go down now to play your favorite games, you start going, well, why is this game working like this? Why did the designer make those choices? Why am I playing it? Why am I not playing other games? So it's really important to not just go out and play some tabletop games, but to start thinking like a designer, to put your hat on as a designer and trying to figure out what makes games good, what makes games bad, why you like a certain game, why you don't. And the best way to do that is to start designing them. We all saw AlphaGo, learning to play Go, learning to beat humans at Go. That was very exciting from an artificial intelligence point of view. But it was also worth asking, why Go? Not why is Go a difficult puzzle for a computer to solve, but why is Go still being played several thousand years after it was invented? Why are humans still drawn to Go? There's also another famous game, Monopoly. One of the most hated games, one of the very unpopular games, but a game that still sells very well around the world. Probably the biggest selling game of all time in tabletop. Well, I'm sure if you've had a game around your family, at some point you might have strong feelings about Monopoly. It's worth sitting down and figuring out why you hate or don't hate Monopoly and understanding the choices made in that game. That will give you a great insight into game design. And there are much more modern games these days where people have realized, why Go is enduringly popular and why Monopoly isn't, and started to make better and better games. And you'll be able to explore those as well. Now, it sounds like a lot of work, but this is the third reason. It actually makes your jobs easier. My old friend Eric Woodchick used to teach computer game design, and he would actually spend the first few months of the course teaching his students how to design tabletop games to make their jobs easier. The thinking goes that it takes a long time to make a computer game. I know it's a lot faster these days, a lot more infrastructure. There's lots more scaffolding so you can get ideas into a player's hand quickly, but it still usually, as far as I know, takes weeks, months, sometimes even years to get a computer game to a playable form. The same effort can be achieved with about a few hours with paper and card and scissors and glue and pens. You can get your characters, your ideas, your plots, some of your mechanics, your narrative choices into a hand of a player. You can even make it an event, and it might be a way to get more women into gaming if we're doing it at a crafternoon. It doesn't have to be just for girls, though. Craft is very big right now, but you can get out and get the scissors and glue out. It's a great kinesthetic experience. You can also do it with your kids. Those guys are a bit terrifyingly white bread, but my friend does do this with his family, and it's got his kids interested in designing games themselves. They're 5 and 8, and they're already starting to design games. So obviously not everything is transferable. You can't test a GUI in a card game. You can't see how a character moves around, but so much of what you're doing will be transferable. And everything you do in the tabletop space, almost everything you do there will be able to be returned back into your video game design. Anything that isn't actual programming text, you're developing your world, your characters, the art, the story, the themes, all of that you're doing works across both places. So nothing you're doing is lost. And it's also, you can actually start parallel developing. You can start developing the tabletop game you're working on. And again, there's often a long delay with video games, but a tabletop game can be, in an optimum situation, tested, worked out, published, put on Kickstarter, and you can get some money back that you may be able to reinvest in your computer game project. You're also building a stepping stone for your customers. They have a way to interact with your game. You've got a stepping stone for your investors as well, for any new staff people. Someone comes into the office and they want to know what you're working on. You can go, well, I can sit down and play it with you. Either the computers are down or we haven't quite got the GUI going, but I can show you the card game that's got some of the ideas in it. And you've also got a place you can bounce your own ideas. Stuck in something in the computer game, not sure how to resolve it, step into the tabletop game. You've now got these two places to test your ideas. And you're also attracting different kinds of talent. When you're working in a tabletop game, you will be able to you'll be reaching across that wall, and there are people who are working in tabletop game design, in tabletop art, and character and plot design that you might not reach when you're just working in a computer game. And those people can bring amazing qualities to your game. And if you start working on a tabletop game, you might be able to get their attention, get a person in who might be the perfect artist, the perfect writer, but you hadn't noticed them because they were working in tabletop games. And that brings us to the fourth point. There are job opportunities waiting. Video game companies are now looking for people with tabletop game experience because they know about all these truths. I'm sure you guys know Firaxis. They make Civ 5 and XCOM, very, very successful computer games. Every year, Firaxis has a convention of tabletop gaming. That's partly because they produce their own tabletop games, but they're also looking for talent. So they have, of course, put out the Civ 5 board game and the XCOM board game. Extremely good successes for them, and drives their market in, bringing it in from other sources. This is Hearthstone. I'm sure you guys all know this one. Designed by Blizzard to be a copy in many ways of Magic the Gathering. And it works exactly like a card game. Although it's all implemented on a computer, it was designed to be a collectible card game, and I would bet anything that along the way to make it easy for themselves, they actually wrote out the cards to test some of those mechanics. There's also Hand of Fate, which was designed right here in Brisbane, I believe. Uses a combination of card mechanics and computer game design. It's another great hybrid. And again, needs tabletop game design skills. They could never have made that game if they didn't know how to implement a card game. That brings us to the last reason, which is again about hybridization. It's the selfish reason. It's not so much a reason for you, it's a reason for me and people who play tabletop games. And that is that we want you in our field as well. There is a lot that's going on in tabletop gaming at the moment. We are experimenting with lots of new things, and we're looking to computer games and computers to give us new opportunities for game design. And there's a lot of board game people who just need basic coders and basic designers. This is Small World. It's a very popular tabletop game. If you have a successful tabletop game now, that people want it on their iPhones and their iPads. They want it because that way they don't have to carry the big heavy box around. When Small World first was put on an iPhone, they phoned it in. They didn't spend a huge amount of money. They didn't do a very complicated architecture. It would end up being only two-player and not having all the options and all the expansions. And there was a great complaint from all their fans. So they went back to Kickstarter. That's why there's a 2 there, because they ran it for a relaunch. And they got $400,000 on the Kickstarter, 3 times more than what they were asking, because people really wanted a computer version of their favorite board game. So that's an opportunity for computer designers and computer programs to work in the board game field. This is the XCOM board game I mentioned earlier. It needs a smart device to play. You cannot play this board game without an iPhone or an Android phone or something like that, or a tablet. And that's really exciting. People in board games were rushing out to get this because they wanted to know how computers were going to change how we play board games. So that needed someone to program it. This is a game called Alchemists. It's a deductive game. You need an iPhone or an iDevice to find out the secret when you combine 2 potions together. Again, really exciting. This is a game called World of Yoho. Very new. All these games have come out in the last year, so it's really exciting time. It comes with a big board representing the Caribbean, and your phone is your little ship. And it tracks all your little details of your ship, and you make it sail around, and that's another really engaging way to bring the 2 technologies together. This is a game called Golem Arcana, where it's basically a miniatures game. You move miniatures around on the board, but they realize that a lot of people don't like about miniatures is tracking all the stats and rolling all the dice. So this pen over here on the left of the picture there, You touch that to the Mini, it knows exactly the Mini's stats. You touch it to where it's moving, it remembers the board on its screen, and it tells you how the fight comes out. So you don't have to do any of the number crunching. So that's another way that people are excited about technology giving us new opportunities. It also lets us test new ideas. This is a tabletop game called Elder Sign. Again, it was really popular. Fantasy Flight Games make a lot of very high-end popular tabletop games, and they always try to put their games onto iPhones and smart devices. They did that with Elder Sign. It was very, very popular. So much so that they wanted to they put out a lot of expansions for it very early on. And they proved very popular on the iDevice. So much so that they have now gone back, and the expansions that they put on the computer version have been translated back into the board game space. So the space in the computer game design allowed them to produce and test mechanics without having to actually go out and make the big heavy boxes in case they didn't sell. It let them test the market, and it lets them test the game ideas. And then they could transfer that back into board games. So there's ways that you can get economy cheaper in both directions. So those are the 5 reasons that I think you should be designing computer games. As I said, it's really important to understand that there is a lot of know-how here. You guys have a lot of insight. Computer gaming is getting very, very developed, and there's a great deal of knowledge in computer gaming about what makes games fun, what makes them engaging, what makes people jump into them. And tabletop gaming is missing that expertise to some extent. I have a friend who loves MMOs. She plays them like several hours a day. She doesn't play a lot of tabletop games because she's missing the experience she gets from MMOs. She likes to have a character that develops over time. She likes to have little rewards that keep coming in. She likes to customize. A lot of tabletop games have nothing like that, but there's a few that are starting to have those kind of ideas, and it'd be great to bring those in. Then I tend to be the opposite. One of the reasons I don't play a lot of computer games is I find they're often they feel like a puzzle to me, and the only fun is the reward you get at the end. I like to have fun along every step of the way, no matter what I'm doing, or even if I'm failing. I don't want to have to jump and get the jump right to get to the next part of the story. I want to have a story whether I jump or whether I miss the jump. And tabletop gaming gives that to me. And there might be a lot of things that tabletop gaming has in it that's bringing people in, that's finding that fun. As I said, there's people who go to tabletop gaming because computer gaming isn't giving them what they want. And if you can tap into that, if you can go into tabletop game design and find those things, you can produce these incredible experiences that will make a great computer game. One of the best examples of that is a game called Space Team. I'm sure you guys know it. It's a great game on your iPhone where you basically have to shout things at other people to get them to do instructions. It's technically a computer game, but what it requires of you to play is to bring people together, to sit next to each other and look at each other and talk, which is what they're getting from tabletop games. So that's an idea. The computer game people have learnt what tabletop games have, and they've written a phone game that gives them that. So the message is, you can't be left behind. Big computer game companies have realized that this is important. More and more games are hybridizing. They're combining the two skills. If you want to do computer game design, you want to take it further, you want to find new and challenging ways to do it, you want to bring more and more people into it, it's absolutely worth your while to find out and do a little bit of tabletop game design. Luckily, there's no excuse to be left behind. Brisbane is actually one of the best places on earth to be interested in tabletop game design, outside of Germany, basically. Germans are mad. But we have several groups in Brisbane dedicated to game design. We also have a dedicated game cafe, the Go Lounge, over in near the hospital, near the PA, Stones Corner. We have game events all the time. We have game conventions. And as I said, we also have lots of groups dedicated to designing and play testing tabletop games. And they have lots of presence online, the kind of groups that we were listing at the front, all those kind of things that are here for you to design video games. Those resources exist online and in the real space to teach you how to play and how to design and how to produce and how to market a tabletop game. We've had in the last 2 years, I think 7 or 8 successfully kickstarted tabletop games coming out of Brisbane, which is more than anywhere else in Australia. And more than most cities have and their fair share of. I'm here in Brisbane because we're having an event that involves tabletop game design. This coming Saturday, which I think is the 9th, we're having a convention. It's out at Ace Comics and Games, which is on Annerley Road in Ipswich. Ipswich Road in Annerley, wrong way around. Ipswich Road in Annerley. The Saturday we have role-playing games and board games that you can come along and play. It's completely open and friendly to anyone who hasn't played before. There's no pre-knowledge required. There's going to be a group of board gamers there who are running drop-in games. So you just have to turn up any time from 9 a.m. onwards, and there'll be someone there who will play a game with you and teach you some of the latest and most exciting games. On the Sunday, we have a very special kind of game jam that Ash mentioned. It's a one-of-a-kind event that basically just rips off the old show, the SBS show, Iron Chef. We give you 150 minutes to design a tabletop game from scratch. And that means everything. You have to provide the board, the cards, the dice. We give you a whole bunch of cardboard and pens and craft and scissors and glue, and we give you 2.5 hours around a theme declared by our own Chairman Karga. We have a wonderful man who looks enough like that man to be close enough. He presents a theme, and we challenge people to see what they can come up with in 2.5 hours. It's very exciting. We'd love to have you guys come out. You don't even have to participate. We love spectators to get a part of the excitement, to help with the play testing, to play the games as they come off the press straight away. It's also a great place to meet some of the great tabletop designers that are working here in Brisbane, because hopefully a lot of them will be there. I know some of them have confirmed for me, so that's great. And you can find out about some of these groups, some of these online things that you can join. So that's on the Sunday from 11 a.m. at the same location at Ace Comics and Games. So as I say, you can't be left behind, but there's no excuse to be left behind, because there are so many ways that you can learn about tabletop game design. So it's up to you what you want to do. And that's all from me, but I'm totally open to asking any questions, guys. As I said to Ash, I don't know what I know that you need to know.
What's the event called?
Sorry?
What's the Saturday?
It's called Go Play Convention, or you might find it on Go Play Brisbane. It has a Facebook presence, of course. We have a website as well, but the Facebook's usually the best place to get the updates. I can find the exact link for you if you can't find it, but you should be able to track it down. Some of the role-playing games for events will be full, but yeah. You can also, if you can't find it, let me know and I'll push. Yes, sir.
I've been following tabletop stuff for a while.
Yep.
There's a huge abundance of miniature-based games that
Yes.
seem to be successful and pulling in huge amounts of money. Have you got a Kickstarter route yourself or helped others?
I have helped others. I have never kickstarted a game myself. You're right that miniatures have been a huge draw, and there's certainly a huge collection of tabletop gamers that are all about the physicality of games. And that's, again, what computer games usually can't give you. And that's why often the pre-orders and the bundles give you a bit something physical, because people really respond to something physical, a toy or somebody's logo to wear around your neck or something. And those who like miniature games, yeah, they love that sort of stuff, and that's why they pay a lot of money for it. I've worked on a certain Kickstarter projects. I've been a stretch goal, like a product by me, but mostly in the role-playing. I'm developing a game at the moment that we may eventually kickstart, but we have to see how it's going to play out. Any other questions, guys? Yes?
What's kind of the process for your average tabletop that you're expecting to kickstart? Like, is it, like, what's the, from coming up with the idea to shipping it? Like, what's a general overview, I guess?
Well, that is a huge question. And people will have different ideas. And I can probably point you to people who can answer that question better than I can. But you have to, basically, you start with conception, you build a prototype, you test, you fix, you test, you fix. Some people will spend, famously there's a great game called Settlers of Catan. It was designed by a German dentist, and basically he spent 4 years making his family play it every single night, he says. And that's why it's so good, because he would just come out and go, try this, try this. It might not take you that long, depending on the game. We can't all be Settlers of Catan. But there is an indeterminate amount of time of play testing, and then that's what they call directed play testing, and then you do blind play testing where you give it to people without any information. Then you go into development and getting your art, and then you start looking about, you can either pitch it to a game company at various points along that stage. That's something we don't have here in Australia, but in America and Europe, there's a lot of conventions for game designers and just for gamers in general. You can go along, they have meet and greets. They're basically like, what do they call that? The dating. Speed dating, yes, they're just like speed dating. You sit down for 5 minutes, you go, here's my game, and then you get up and you move to the next publisher and go, here's my game. Yeah, as I say, that's a bit trickier, but we do have events that are coming up that are making those kind of things easier. In Sydney in June, there's an event where you can bring ideas and pitch them to certain companies. And then, yeah, then there's the Kickstarter, then there's the fulfillment. So it's all about, yes, playtesting, refining, playtesting, refining, production, development, getting your art and your sales and your production, and then kickstarting, and then delivery. Does that give you an idea?
So with it's common to have like a Kickstarter right after, like organizing something with the publisher?
If you have a publisher, then they will probably talk to you about how they will promote the game. So you have two options. You can self-publish, which a lot of people in Brisbane do, as I say, because they can't get access to the companies. But there's competitions where ways you can send your game off to a company overseas. But if you self-publish, you would run a Kickstarter yourself generally. And there are lots of systems and people in Brisbane who can help you with that. I know a guy in Melbourne whose job is to help you run a Kickstarter for your tabletop game, because he's run so many successful ones. He's just run his own one for his own game, which got 3 times what they were asking, so he knows his stuff. Yeah, so if you're going down the publication avenue, that's Kickstarter is ready to help you. You generally want to be well produced. People like to see a game that's very close to being finished. They want to be reassured you've got the art, you've got a printer lined up, that you can show them a very fancy prototype. You can never have a too polished prototype at any stage because everything about it sells. Of course, that means spending more money before you're fixed, but that's one of the downsides of tabletop game. But there's also getting easier ways to get prototypes these days. There are sites on the web where you can just go, send me 100 cards. Here's my art. Send me 100 cards back, or 3 or 4 decks of that. So you can get mini runs of things quite easily, which helps with that. Yep. Any other questions, guys?
So yeah, so this may be coming heavily from the video games.
Yeah, sure.
There's a bit of tabletop knowledge. So obviously in video games there's a lot of strong genres, and
yes.
Games tend to fall into specific playstyles, and there's hybrids, but they tend to be difficult to do because people tend to find themselves drawn. If you like action games, you maybe don't like mixing too much role playing into that.
Yep.
It fits as a role playing game with a bit of action, or action, a bit of role playing. Are there similar trends in board game stuff, or I guess that's when...
It's a very good question, and there are, but there's also, what's actually been happening in the last 10 years is that's been disappearing more and more. There used to be very strong divisions. There were people who, I played miniature war games, or I have to only play historical war games, and I don't touch fantasy, or, I play very serious games, and other games I don't play. But more and more, people have actually started crossing those boundaries in design and bringing people in from different perspectives and going, this has a bit of tactical, a bit of role-playing. This is, collaborative, so it gets rid of people who really want to fight each other, but it has a real tactical element, so it's still going to appeal to them. So luckily, we've avoided the downside of those sort of harsh splashes at the moment. And that also has the downside, though, is you have to learn a lot of games sometimes to get into it. But yeah, it's the nice thing about tabletop design is that there's a lot of ideas crashing into each other at the moment, which is really exciting. And that means there's more and more options as well. What's one of the right things that's driving people into tabletop gaming nowadays is that they go, well, I don't like games because I don't like to fight people. They go, well, you play collaborative games. You don't have to fight anyone. Or games take too long. This game takes 5 minutes. I want a game that lets me play a character. Here's 10 games that do that. We have all these varieties now. So there's a big spectrum rather than blocks. There's a question here first.
Yeah, just the name of the convention in June in Sydney.
It's called LFG something, LFG Con, or their LFG Oz, I think, is their website. We're looking for group. If you don't find it, come and ask me and I'll look it up for you.
Just
Yep.
wondering what the overall, mind there, Christian?
Yep.
What have been the overall market trends? Has the market been growing or shrinking since the onset of computer games?
It's been growing.
Like
It's been
role-playing was massive and then it just absolutely got destroyed by video.
Role-playing did fall off, but it's actually had a bit of a resurgence because there's been a bleed back, because people have gone, oh, I can see, I really, like the kind of people who play Dragon Age, for example, have been coming into role-playing game in a very different way. Because there's sort of, role-playing certainly has two faces to it. There's the people who like it kind of as a tactical game, and they really liked jumping into the CRPG area, where they could stat out their character and find a cool path, and not have to do as much math and work and not have to roll dice and not have to necessarily find a social group or friends to play it with. But role-playing also has a much more creative and storytelling element to it as well. And not that any side's better, but there are people now who are playing deep character games like Dragon Age and getting a lot of story. And then there is a Dragon Age role-playing game made by Green Ronin. And people have been jumping across to that. On the tabletop show that I mentioned, they also have, they ran a role-playing game called, they did a whole series basically on role-playing games. And Will Wheaton worked with Green Ronin to build an RPG that then people could go, I've seen it on tabletop, I can play it. So tabletop RPGs are having a resurge, and board gaming is going crazy at the moment. Because in the last 15 years, there's been this revolution of people going, games don't have to be Monopoly, they don't have to be diplomacy, they don't have to be a war game on a table. They can be fast, they can be fun, they can be unlike anything you've ever played before. They can tell a story, they can not cause your children to fight each other.
It's reflected in Kickstarter, there's just such a proliferation of
Yes.
explosion of different offerings on the supply side.
That's right. It is, and it's hard to keep track of them all. I had someone ask me that the other day. It's like, there's so many games on Kickstarter, I don't know which ones to buy. And I said, well, find people whose taste you like and follow them on Twitter. That's I think the only thing I can think of is that find people and see what they recommend and find out why they recommend it. But yes, it is a great growing market, and that's another reason why video games are interested. They want to put their products into that market. Any other questions, guys? Yep.
So kind of like the growing technology like 3D printing,
Yep.
does that really influence the art direction of tabletop games?
I think we're still waiting to see exactly what's going to happen there. There's a lot of people who are looking at pushing the boundaries between miniature gaming and computer gaming, like with Golem Arcana and things like that. Nothing has changed yet, as far as I can tell, but there is a thing called Hero Forge where you can print your own minis. You can design them like a character designer in a role-playing game, and then you say, send me that miniature. So that's really exciting. I know a lot of people are doing that. We're interested to see where 3D printing is going to take us and what that may mean for tabletop game design. We'd love to see, again, someone with video game design going, well, I know how to use this. I'm going to bring it over and have a thing where every game we print you something new. There's a trend in tabletop gaming called legacy gaming where your box is full of secrets and your game starts out as one game, and then after 2 games it says, you read in the rules, now open this, and you open this and there's more pieces. And you can imagine that you could take that to the next level of having, and then go to your 3D printer, and we're going to print you out new pieces that you've never seen before as your game changes setting all of a sudden, something like that. That could be really exciting. Anyone else? Oh, yeah, at the back. Yeah, you say yes?
The Facebook group Tabletop Game Designers Australia.
Yes, I am. Yeah, I'm a member. Yeah, that's great.
Right, because I joined earlier in the year. I've just been observing so far. Are they a good resource, a good community there?
I will have to, if they're the one I think of, I think so. I am actually a member. I did a search and there's about 5 different tabletop game design groups that I'm actually a member of. And there's one that's Australia and one that's Brisbane only, and there's one that's just about artists and writers as opposed to designers. But as far as I've seen, Tabletop Game Design Australia is good and has some good people in it and some good advice. Yeah, so stay with them, but join a few, and yeah, get what you. Well, if they're not giving you good stuff, just find another one. That's my advice. Yes.
So just about the market for, has that also been, the growth, has that also happened to card-based games? Or
Yes.
Is that, okay.
Yeah, when I say tabletop games, I mean all of them, yeah. Card games have been, again, very popular because they're smaller, they're more portable. It's not like people aren't playing, bridge and canasta, but there are these new and exciting card games that are collaborative or are imaginative or involve sneakiness. Like there's a game called Resistance, where you're pretending to be either part of the resistance or part of the order and fighting each other, and that's hugely popular.
Are they having a hard time breaking into the market when they're up against stuff like, Magic or?
There's certainly a very defined CCG market there, and that's one thing with what you're talking about of genres. That can be the bread and butter for a lot of designers and a lot of companies and a lot of stores, but those game designers, those players aren't stealing resources from those other card games. They tend to be quite young people. They want to collect, they want to play religiously. What's happening, in fact, is that after they've done a bit of that, and they either grow up or they start seeing other things on the shelves, they then go, oh, but I also want to play that. And they're not stealing people away from the other board games, because there's just more and more markets being found. Yep.
So with that, like, go to tablet implementation to all those board games,
Yep.
like, how's that working out? Like, is that a good piece of game design for tabletop?
Mostly, yeah. I think people are really excited. People have devices with them all the time. When I flew up here, my friends were on the same flight as me, a few seats back. They were playing Elder Sign the whole way up because you can't get a board out on a plane. When I go up to visit my nephews, I'm not sure what kind of games they're going to play. We do Ticket to Ride on my iPad instead of bringing the whole box. So people are very much drawn to, yes, implementations. They want them. It's interesting what they choose, how they choose to implement them. Does that answer?
What about like XCOM, like that kind of
Oh,
thing
yeah.
where you've got a tablet and a board?
That was a very, very popular idea. People, as I say, the hardcore gamers are hungry for new ideas. There's a point at the moment now where there's a lot of new people rushing into the field, which is great, and new design, but there's a golden age and a revolution of design going on, and a lot of people are like, there's a famous award called the Spiel des Jahres, which is the best game of the year, given out at Essen, the game convention in Germany. A few years ago, they added the New Horizons Award because so much is changing, and it's just this is a game that made us play games in a way we've never played before. And so people are really hungry for that, and XCOM, hugely popular, went off the shelves amazingly quickly, and people are really interested in what it's doing. It has a mechanic where basically it's a collaborative game. You all take different roles in the XCOM sort of facility. One of you is in charge of doling out the money, one of you is in charge of research, one of you is in charge of the satellite protection or something, one of you is running the military teams on the ground. And it's like a lot of collaborative games, you have to figure out where you spend your resources. But what the app does is it doesn't give you enough time to do that. So it says things like, new event is happening, this appears on the board. You have 1 minute to decide what to do. And then clicks down, buzz, whatever's happening now we roll the dice, wherever you've chosen. So that gives you a whole new way of playing a game where there's like an authoritative third voice outside the room who's telling you what to do. And people are just really excited by that, Jen.
Do you think that's like the Nightmare video game that came out in the 90s?
Yeah,
Was really popular?
It's an interesting extension of that in some ways, yeah. I think the smart thing is that there's no face on it because that doesn't always work. But yeah, Nightmare was an interesting idea, and I think it's just a little bit before its time. People were trying to do what they did with expand games with VCRs, and it was a good idea. And yeah, nowadays, the other thing about XCOM is it doesn't come with a rule book, which people find frustrating, but you learn it by running the tutorial. You turn on your app and it goes, we'll teach you how to play the game bit by bit. We'll explain it to you with a human voice. So again, there's this extra voice coming in to teach you, which is very interesting. And a lot of people have gone, that you have to have a rule book as well, because I don't think like that. But it's an interesting new idea. If anyone thinks of anything else, I'll be here, I'll be around. So, but that's all from me. Yeah. Thanks.